and Martha.
Thank you, Bret. So we are 1 week out now from the midterm elections, and the heat is clearly on. The president all in, revving up the base, saying now that he believes he can change the ability to gain U.S. citizenship if you're born on U.S. American soil.
We're the only country in the world where a person comes in, has a baby, and the baby is essentially a citizen of the United States for 85 years with all of those benefits. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it has to end.
Have you talked about that with council?
Yeah, I have.
So where in the process?
It's in the process. It'll happen with an executive order.
So Canada is the only other developed nation to have this rule, according to the IMF. Others also have it, but the move sparks some outrage.
It's ridiculous that we have this rule. It's not ridiculous that we have this rule. This rule is in the Constitution.
There is no precedent. There is no legal authority. There is no legitimate basis to this suggestion.
This is the President of the United States who is supposed to be in office and uphold the Constitution, and he is trying to defy the Constitution.
But actually, if you look back in history, this idea has been discussed, obviously, since the original debate of the 14th Amendment. And the meaning of the words of that amendment have been wrangled with for decades. In fact, Jeb Bush also suggested that perhaps the amendment should be revisited, as did Harry Reid.
If making it easy to be an illegal alien isn't enough, how about offering a reward for being an illegal immigrant? No sane country would do that, right? Guess again. If you break our laws by entering this country without permission and give birth to a child, we reward that child with U.S. citizenship.
So Reid later backpedaled on that and changed his mind, said he regretted bringing it up. But in moments, Bret Hume is here on the vitriol toward President Trump following this announcement. But first, we start with constitutional law attorney Jonathan Turley for a level-headed look at what the president actually can and cannot do. Jonathan, good to have you with us here tonight. You say that you're glad the president brought it up because you believe that it will force the courts to look at it, and that's good.
That's absolutely correct. You know, we're about 150 years late in finding out what this amendment means. There has been a debate since this was first ratified. All of this debate turns on these 6 rather ill-chosen words as to what was meant by being subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. Some of the drafters at the time clearly evidenced a belief that non-citizens that come to this country, whether they're diplomats or undocumented, would not have immediate citizenship for their children. And so there's a good debate here. There are 3 different types of interpretations that have been put forward. I can't imagine how people can say with such certainty that this language means that anyone in the United States, for any reason, can have a citizen when they give birth on our soil. That's not evident from the text of the amendment. Many people at the time clearly didn't hold that view. Now, that's not a frivolous view. There's good faith arguments on both sides. But the Supreme Court has never said with any clarity or finality what it means.
Interesting. So you think that this would kind of, move that forward. Can the president do it with an executive order? Could he make that change?
That, I think, is more doubtful. I think Lindsey Graham is right that the best way to go about this is with legislation. Of those 3 interpretations, the president would lose on 2 in using this particular means. It ultimately comes back to the meaning of the amendment. If the amendment means that anyone in the United States can produce a child who is a citizen, then obviously the president can't change it, neither can Congress. One interpretation is that it's left to Congress, and in that case, he still can't change it with an executive order, but Congress can. So an executive order is not the ideal way to go here. He's adding baggage to an already difficult challenge.
So here's a tweet from Jim Acosta earlier today. He said the founders set up the Constitution so the president can't do what he's proposing to do with birthright citizenship. It's a stunt, like sending troops to the border for a non-existent invasion, he says. But, in terms of the first part of that, and we're going to get to the second part of it in a moment with Bret Hume, but in terms of the ability to approach this as a president, what tools does he have in his toolbox, potentially?
Well, the best tool is to go to Congress and follow the lead, in this case of Lindsey Graham, and to seek legislation. It's a good thing for this to be reviewed by the court. The Supreme Court ruled many years ago that a Chinese family was entitled to the citizenship of their child who was born on U.S. soil. But that family was here as legal residents, and many people who adopt the more narrow view of this amendment believe that with citizens would fit that narrow interpretation. So the Supreme Court still has work to do, and it's been about 150 years for it to do it.
Jonathan Turley, always enlightening. Thank you very much. Good to talk to you tonight. So as we said, the heat's on, about a week to go. So all of these issues are hot, hot, hot right now. And there is no shortage of vitriol flying around on both sides. Watch this.
But what Donald Trump and what the Republican Party that has now been completely taken over by Donald Trump is using is racism. And you see it in Donald Trump saying he's going to circumvent the Constitution with an executive order. He can't do that. It's not about anything other than scaring Americans and actually appealing to their most racist base instincts.
Fox News senior political analyst Bret says that the charges that the president is racist reflect media coverage gone awry. Bret, good evening to you. Your reaction to Mr. Scarborough there?
Well, look, this may be misbegotten, as Jonathan Turley suggests, and an executive order may not possibly pass muster under the Constitution to repeal birthright citizenship. But that doesn't make it racist. I mean, racism is a pretty clear thing. It is the belief in the superiority of one race over another, and you have to pretty well express that, it seems to me, to be considered a racist. And I think the case that's constantly made, and you hear it, it's not even a case, it's the assertion that's constantly made, that casually made, flung about, that Donald Trump is a racist, is simply not substantiated. And for Joe Scarborough, who ought to know better, to say something like that as casually as he did there, it seems to me is an example of why the media are having so much trouble building public support these days. It's declined to near record low levels. And this kind of stuff is what's part of it. Yeah,
I mean, that's the problem. It's like, you can't bring something up and discuss it without these labels starting to be attached to it. And we played that video of Harry Reid way back when. It was in the 90s, long, long time ago. But, bringing up the topic, discussing it, he later changed his mind about how he felt about it. But the idea that discussing it, now I understand that there's, a perception which may be true, that this is political with 1 week to go, and that it's, sort of throwing more red meat where the president thinks it will help him out a week from now. But the idea that you can't even discuss it without being labeled a racist is, I think, something we all have to sort of really take a step back and think about here.
And think about it this way, Martha. What is the great achievement of the civil rights movement of the 60s and beyond? And that was that racism in America became absolutely unacceptable. I mean, the overwhelming consensus in this country is anti-racist, and that is why it has become, unfortunately, since then, a cudgel in the hands of those who would use it to attack others, because if you can be successfully labeled a racist, you're finished. I mean, that is about as damaging as anything you can have. So it's tempting for demagogues to fling that term about. What you don't expect is people who are supposed to have some sense in the media, who, even if they're, if they're entitled to express their opinions, to be tossing around a term like that. It's just totally improper. And earlier, you had a quote from a White House correspondent for CNN who labeled this a stunt and said it was a bogus threat at the border. Well, maybe it is. But is that the job of a beat reporter to be saying that, or is that the job of one of their editorialists, one of their opinion dispensers? Because in my day, when I was covering the White House, you couldn't be both.
Fascinating. Well, look, David Remnick also weighed in. He's more of an opinion person. But this is sort of the general line of thinking, that it's okay to say that the president is a racist because we're in completely unprecedented times, and they believe that, basically the country as we know it under this president is falling apart. Watch this.
This is an emergency. The Trump presidency represents an emergency. I can't emphasize that enough. The President of the United States of America now encourages division, hatred, and exploiting this for purely electoral means.
So that was the discussion this morning, and, nods all around the table. Everybody just nodding. Absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. In agreement.
Well, Martha, I've been saying for some time now that journalists in this country consider Mr. Trump's election to be a national emergency. I kind of expected I might get some pushback on that. It is interesting to hear one of the dukes
Somebody's picked up your line.
of liberal journalism pronouncing that as if it's a certified fact. If you look what's going on around this country, if you get outside of New York City, where the opinions seem not to differ very much among journalists, you don't see this attitude. They don't feel like they're an emergency. Now, they may have trials and tribulations. They may have policies they don't like. But, with unemployment at these levels, with the stock market still way higher than it was when he took office and so on, I don't think people think this is an emergency, and they don't think that increasing the defense budget and taking a different posture around the world constitutes an emergency. The thing about Trump is he says a lot of extravagant things, but if you follow him with any thought, you notice that his bark is far worse than his bite, and that a lot of the stuff he says is just bluster. And people react and get their hair on fire about it all the time. You feel like saying, folks, grow up.
Yeah.
Watch.
I know. I was listening to this conversation this morning, and I listened to hear sort of what the meat behind the argument was. And at one point, it went to that he was responsible for sort of like emotional climate change in the country. A version of emotional, psychological climate change in the country. One last question, because, the politics of this suggestion that he has made in terms of changing the 14th Amendment sort of went both ways today. Here's Paul Ryan. I want to get one last thought for you on the politics of that suggestion.
You cannot end birthright citizenship with an executive order. As a conservative, I'm a believer in following the plain text of the Constitution, and I think in this case the 14th Amendment's pretty clear. And that would involve a very, very lengthy constitutional process. But where we obviously totally agree with the president is getting at the root issue here, which is unchecked illegal immigration.
Chuck Grassley basically agreed with him, and Lindsey Graham lined up with the president that it was worth looking at this. Yeah, but Lindsey Graham said the way to do it was, he would try it in Congress, and that he would, and indeed, I believe he went on to say that he introduced a constitutional amendment. So I think, on balance, the leaders on the Hill are not lining up with the president on this idea of an executive order. Look, I think the language of the 14th Amendment is pretty clear. I don't think you can do this by an executive order. It'll be interesting to see if it gets tested in the court. But one can only imagine, for example, Bret Kavanaugh, with his devotion to the text of the Constitution, ruling on an executive order by a president that says, I'm revoking this. I don't have a sense that the kind of judges that the president has promoted to the bench are going to take anything other than a dim view of this. Well, it's interesting because Jonathan Turley said that these 5 words, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, have never been, really tested by the Supreme Court in this way, and he welcomed that kind of discussion and debate over the constitutionality of it. So it'll be interesting to see where it goes. Bret, yeah, it will be. Yeah, thanks so much. Great to see you. You bet, Martha. Thank you. So despite calls like this to stay away,
please, Mr. President, if you're watching this, wait a week. Come next week. The focus this week is on the funerals.
President Trump was in Pittsburgh today. Here are some of the scenes from that. He's with the rabbi from the Tree of Life Synagogue there. He paid his respects to the community that's been shaken after a mass shooting at the local synagogue, the Tree of Life. Molly Hemingway here on the optics, the civility, the healing of all of this coming up next. So President Trump in Pittsburgh today with the First Lady and his daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner, all showing their support and mourning the lives of the innocent 11 people who were gunned down as they worshipped at Tree of Life Synagogue on Saturday. That's the rabbi in front of them there. The visit overshadowed somewhat by controversy as some protested and there were some officials who stayed away. At least one potential presidential candidate cast blame on the president.
When he goes around getting people to scream and hate, then bad things happen, and you saw the results here.
But UN Ambassador Nikki Haley defended the president and offered some context from her time as South Carolina governor, when a hate crime struck Charleston in 2015 and 9 African-American churchgoers were murdered at the hands of a white supremacist. Haley tweeting in part, quote, The country was very racially divided at the time. We didn't once blame President Obama. We focused solely on the lives lost and their families. Have some respect for these families and stop the blame. Here now, Molly Hemingway, senior editor of The Federalist and a Fox News contributor. Molly, good evening to you. Good to have you here today. Your thoughts on this controversy as we watch the president in Pittsburgh?
Well, I think it's important at times like this for everyone in the country to unify, to come together, and to join together to condemn acts of terrorism such as this. You saw a lot of media highlighting of people saying that the president shouldn't represent the country at the Tree of Life Synagogue. But you didn't see a lot of coverage of the rabbi of the congregation, Rabbi Jeffrey Baier, who said that of course the president is welcome, that he's welcome anytime, reminded people that he is a citizen of this country, that the rabbi is a citizen, and that that is his president. That's the proper posture. It's one that the country has done a pretty good job with in previous incidents. We've had controversial presidents for a while now, but generally the country comes together in unity to condemn acts of terrorism, and that's a good place to be. It has been disappointing to see the media, mainstream media figures and other people on the left use it as a political cudgel.
What did you think of Nikki Haley's comments about the similar incident in some ways that happened in Charleston?
Yeah, unfortunately, because evil exists, there were quite a few acts of terrorism during President Obama's 8 years of presidency. And even at a very controversial time, you know, she gave the example of what happened in South Carolina. Also, there was the Gabby Gifford shooting in Arizona. And I think what you saw was people largely responded to President Obama's remarks and speaking on those issues in good faith. They generally commended him for his work at those times. That is a much better way to be. Again, it has been a missed opportunity, I think, for the media in that they have used this not as a time of unity, but for to demonstrate that they're not very good at covering issues like this fairly. They're literally blaming Donald Trump for these horrific acts of anti-Semitism, which is inappropriate on multiple levels. Not only is he not an anti-Semite, but it's a form of scapegoating. What this shooter did at the synagogue in Pittsburgh was scapegoat Jews for, he thought Jews were to blame for everything that was wrong in the world. That's scapegoating. The proper response to violent scapegoating is not to scapegoat other people, to say that President Trump or Republicans are the reason that these types of things happen. That's a very inappropriate reaction.
David Horanzi, your colleague at The Federalist, said it was ironic to see many of the same liberals who recently fought to prop up the world's most powerful Jew-hating terror state, he wrote, lecturing us on the importance of combating anti-Semitism. But there they were, I should say, yesterday. What did you think about that?
Right, and this is the thing. People want to make anti-Semitism a thing on the left or a thing on the right. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism has a long and storied history. It exists all across the political spectrum, and it is very disappointing to see people not deal with the anti-Semitism problem in their own corner, use it again as a political cudgel against other people. A lot of what we've seen with the recent spate of anti-Semitic rhetoric or violence has come from the left, and it can come from the right as well. It is a universal problem, and it should not be used to target one political side or another.
Molly, thank you. Great to have you with us tonight. Molly Hemingway. So coming up next, Hillary Clinton cracks a joke during a discussion about African-American politicians.
Yeah, I know they all look alike.
No, they don't.
Juan Williams says, relax, it was just a joke. And he joins me next.
Well, I'd like to be president.
Okay.
So that comment made even Hillary's fellow Democrats a little bit nervous, perhaps some of them this week. And then today there's another controversy over a little joke that she made about race. Watch this.
What do you think of Cory Booker's? And you didn't comment on him, and you feel free.
Oh, I adore him.
What do you think about him saying kicked him in the shins, essentially? Start to get to that kind of political.
Well, that was Eric Holder.
Yeah, Eric Holder.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, I know they all look alike.
No, they don't. Oh, well done.
Whoa, said the crowd. Joining me now, Juan Williams, co-host of The Five and Fox News political analyst. Juan, always good to have you here.
Thank you so much.
What do you think?
Well, I think, I'm glad you played that piece about Hillary saying she wanted to be president. Everybody, oh, my God. And, of course, if you played the whole tape, you'd see she said, but, of course, I'm not running again. And in this case, I think
No, hold on. She said, I don't want to run for president.
There you go.
But I'd like to be president.
Correct.
She doesn't like the running, the
well,
politics
you gotta run.
part.
That's,
I know.
you got to run.
But she then said, well, I'll think about it after the midterms. I'm going to wait till after the midterms.
Yeah,
to
she
make a
didn't.
decision.
No. I mean, but I say Martha for president if you want to run.
No, thank you.
That's what
No,
I
no,
suspect.
no.
All right. And in this case, I think it's pretty clear that Kara Swisher had confused Cory Booker and Eric Holder for the if they go low, kick them. And so she plays on this, and Kara's response is telling. She says, no, they don't. And then she realizes, oh, my God, everybody's laughing. Hillary Clinton was just playing on the old meme of black people looking like or something. And it was a joke. But it was, to me, obviously a transparent joke. I don't think there was any ill will intended or involved. And I think people who don't like Hillary are going after it.
Right. You know, if President Trump said that in the same situation.
Different context because of his whole divisive nature in terms of racial comments. But again, I think in that situation, conservatives don't like politically correct speech and the inability to make a joke. And I think President Trump in that situation, he would have set off alarms, but I think he would have had the same defense.
But, you know, but this is what, I mean, we live in such a hypersensitive moment, right? And when you and I spoke about Ron DeSantis, you know, and he said, monkey it up, right? You felt that that was clearly
the question was
a racial issue. And I said, I think he was just joking. And I think he even mixed up his metaphors when he made that joke.
Yes.
But he wasn't allowed to, he wasn't let off the hook for that.
No, because I think that the whole question was about DeSantis playing to white nationalist instincts.
You're putting that on top of him.
No, I'm just saying I'm a journalist. You're a journalist. We know the context of that race in Florida is quite rich, especially with racial animosity. And when DeSantis used that coming out of the box against Gillum, I mean, it's like Gillum said in the recent debate. You know, it's not that I'm saying he's racist. It's that white racists say he's one of them. That's a hell of a statement.
Well, I mean, you know, we could have a whole discussion about the Florida race.
Correct.
It's very, you know, we actually have we have more on that because here's the way it stands right now. Andrew Gillum's up 46.9, Ron DeSantis at 43.9, and I should just say DeSantis would say that, you know, your characterization of him is completely wrong. He has said that in
I didn't I just quoted what Gillum said about him. But again, what I am saying, and I don't think this is in dispute, is that race in that contest for governor of Florida is a charged issue.
All right, let's take a look at this stop from President Trump with regard to that. Here's what he said.
Here's a guy that, in my opinion, is a stone-cold thief. And his city, Tallahassee, is known as the most corrupt in Florida and one of the most corrupt in the nation. He's a disaster. And how he's even close to being tied is hard to believe.
Now, a lot was read into that today because he called him a stone-cold thief. Now, the whole issue here is over Hamilton tickets and, you know, some investigation that was done. They're saying he's not under investigation, but there are questions that were raised about whether or not he inappropriately got these theater tickets. The president, as he often does, goes you know, way further, but he does that with everybody, regardless of their gender, regardless of their race.
Yeah.
He often does that, but boy, that was jumped all over today, that was a racist thing for him to say.
I don't know about racist, but goodness gracious, stone cold thief, and then he doesn't have anything to back it up. If he said, here's why this man is a thief, we know X, Y, Z, then you'd say, well, I guess he has the goods. But he doesn't have the goods. So it comes across as a political statement intended to help his favorite, Ron DeSantis, down in Florida.
But you don't see that stone-cold thief statement. You would not say that.
I don't know how race got into that one.
No, I watched a whole segment today on another channel.
I don't think that's fair. But I do think I think it's libelous. I mean, if you come out and say Juan Williams is a thief, you say, well, why would you say such a thing? What evidence do you have of that? And when this was asked about President Trump,
the whole stupid thing about the Hamilton tickets, I'm not saying that it's substantiated, but it's a conversation that's happening in that race. That's what he's talking about.
Well, no, if you say someone's a thief, I hope you have some evidence of it beyond he took some theater tickets from an FBI undercover agent. I think the best argument, Martha, from the president's perspective would be the ongoing probe into Tallahassee corruption.
She said.
Yeah, but there is nothing, and the FBI isn't saying that Gillum is the target of that investigation.
But they're investigating the office.
Yes, not the office. They're investigating the whole City Hall operation. But I would think that President... Right, but I would think that President Trump, especially given the Mueller investigation, would be very sensitive to anybody saying, you're the target. when in fact President Trump repeatedly says he's not the target of the, quote, the probe into Russian interference.
Good point. Juan, thanks.
You're
Good
welcome.
to see you.
Nice to see you.
Thanks for coming by. So with more than 5,000 troops deploying to the southern border, we talked to the man who once led the counterinsurgency strategy in Afghanistan about whether President Trump's answer to the migrant caravan will work. General Stanley McChrystal coming up next.
You were just saying gets people sent to Allenwood. Just saying could get you buried real quick.
Great scene from the movie Black Mass, based on Boston mob boss Whitey Bulger, the man once known as the most wanted fugitive in the United States. He was reportedly murdered today on his first day at a new West Virginia federal prison. It was new to him. Trace Gallagher live from our West Coast newsroom with a look back at one of America's most notorious killers. Trace.
Martha, the Department of Justice and Bureau of Prisons still won't confirm exactly how Whitey Bulger died, but as you noted, there are numerous reports saying the former mob boss was killed by fellow inmates with ties to the mafia. TMZ is also reporting that Bulger, who was confined to a wheelchair, was wheeled into a secluded corner of the prison outside the view of surveillance cameras and beaten to death. He was found lying on the ground at 8:20 this morning. Remember, Whitey Bulger was an FBI informant for many years and actually ratted out his gang's biggest rivals. Experts in organized crime say this may have been payback a long time coming. In the mid-1990s, it was a corrupt FBI agent who tipped off Bulger that he was about to be arrested. Bulger then fled and remained on the lam for 16 years, becoming the FBI's most wanted criminal. And despite his face routinely being featured on national news and a film about his life, The Departed, winning Best Picture in 2006, Whitey Bulger was somehow able to hide in plain sight, living with his longtime girlfriend, Catherine Grieg, in a seaside condominium in Santa Monica. After getting a tip in 2011, the FBI raided the condo and found fake IDs, numerous weapons, and $800,000 in cash. Bulger was then convicted on a laundry list of charges, including his part in 11 murders, though some investigators believe he killed dozens, along with racketeering and money laundering charges. Catherine Grieg was also convicted on lesser charges and is scheduled to be released from prison in 2020. Whitey Bulger, who gained the nickname as a kid because of his blonde hair, had been serving his life sentence at a prison in Florida, but he apparently threatened a prison employee and was transferred to the Hazleton prison in West Virginia. He was killed just a few hours after arriving and is the third inmate killed at Hazleton in the past 7 months. The prison union says the facility is severely understaffed. Martha.
Wow. Quite a story. Thank you very much, Trace. Here now, joining me, someone that Whitey Bulger also threatened to kill because of his in-depth reporting over many years about the mob boss, Howie Carr, Boston Herald columnist and radio talk show host. Howie, good to have you with us tonight. I am curious, you wrote several books about him. You have studied him and his family for many years. What was your reaction when you heard what happened in West Virginia today?
Well, I know, Martha, you're not supposed to speak ill of the dead, but, you know, he did threaten to kill me, and I fortunately wasn't murdered, obviously, but he was a monster. He was an arch criminal. He was a bank robber, a cocaine dealer, a serial murderer, a pedophile, an extortionist. He was a horrible, horrible person, and I can't say that I'm unhappy that he's dead tonight. You know, he lived to the age of 89. That's a lot longer than most of his victims lived, obviously.
Do you have any theory
no
on
one's shedding any tears.
Any theory on what happened, who wanted to get him, and who might have been in this West Virginia prison to finish that job?
Well, I talked to Johnny Materano, one of his partners today in the Winter Hill gang, who I wrote a book with, Hitman. And he said it's perfect karma. You know, the guy ratted all these people into prison. And he was a vicious criminal who killed people in cold blood, and so now he ends up getting killed in cold blood in prison. I don't know who killed him, really. I'm kind of surprised that that there would still be this kind of feeling about him in organized crime. Most of the people that he double-crossed are either out and fairly old, and or they're dead. And this is a perfect ending for them, though.
Maybe it's one of their kids, one of their younger relatives, perhaps, and maybe someday we'll learn. Speaking of relatives, his brother learned the news of what happened today from a local reporter in Boston. Watch this.
Have you heard the reports before? Am I the first one telling you this?
Yes.
I'm sorry to be doing that.
That's all right.
Can you tell me what your reaction is on hearing that?
No.
He's your brother.
I know he is. I don't have anything to say right now.
What do you make of that?
Well, I mean, Jackie Bulger, his younger brother, paid a heavy price for being his sibling. He lost his state pension. He actually went to prison for a while for lying to a grand jury about visiting a Florida bank where Whitey had a safe deposit box. So I guess, you know, it's like The Godfather, Michael Corleone, said, "This is the life we chose," right? I mean, this is the life the Bulgers chose, and this is what they're paying. I mean, the trial, Martha, was amazing back in 2013. At one point, one of the victims, his girlfriend, Catherine Gregg, who Trace was referring to, she was a divorcee. She had two brothers-in-law, and Whitey murdered both of her brothers-in-law, and then she took up with him and lived with him. And one of the brothers-in-law was a guy named Paulie McGonigal, and after Whitey killed him and buried his body, he'd disappeared. They couldn't get insurance, nothing. He called up the house where Paulie McGonigal lived, and a 10-year-old, 12-year-old son picks up the phone. This was right at Christmas. And Whitey says to the kid, "Your father won't be home for Christmas." And the kid goes, "Who is this?" And Whitey goes, "Santa Claus."
Ah, unbelievable. Great story, Howie. I guess there's something that Catherine Gregg found appealing about all of that. She spent a lot of time with them in Santa Monica. Oh, my God.
That's what she said.
Howie, thank you very much. Howie Carr, great to see you tonight,
Martha.
sir. Good to have you with us. So President Trump sets off some critics with his decision to send thousands of U.S. troops to our southern border. Is it the right move? We will talk to General Stanley McChrystal, former U.S. military commander in Afghanistan, coming up next. The Pentagon announcing the deployment of more than 5,000 troops to the southern border. And already critics are taking aim at the president's decision, noting that it is more than double the 2,000 troops fighting in Syria and Iraq against ISIS. Listen to this.
These troops are being rushed to the border in time for the midterms, not in time for the migrants to arrive, exceeding the combined U.S. military footprint in Iraq and Syria.
It's not about anything other than scaring Americans and actually appealing to their most racist base instincts.
General Stanley McChrystal is the former U.S. commander in Afghanistan who developed and implemented a comprehensive counterinsurgency strategy there. He's also the author of the new book, Leaders, Myth and Reality. General, thank you so much for being with us. It's wonderful to have you with us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Martha.
So tell me what your reaction is. You know, you hear the back and forth. The president obviously thinks it's a good idea to send them to the border. I interviewed the Homeland Security Secretary. She thinks it's the right move. And then you hear, others who think that it's sort of just complete overkill, way overboard.
Well, I think defending our borders is essential. I would say that announcing the deployment of regular Army forces or regular military forces as though we're sort of reinforcing the walls of the Alamo, it creates a mental image that in some people, I think maybe connotes the idea of an emergency that I don't think is as great as the depiction might be.
You talk about the fact that you think that it's tempting to want strength in these tumultuous times, but you say that, it's exactly the moment we yearn for a strong, charismatic leader to lead us in crushing our opposition that we actually need a more humble approach. Is that about President Trump?
No, that's about any leader. In reality, as we get pushed towards greater levels of vitriol and greater levels of emotion, we want to defeat the enemy until they're crushed, until we win completely. But in reality, that's a short-sighted view. There's going to be a tomorrow. There's going to be a next week. You have to deal with the people who are your opposition. And in many ways, it's that balance. The Federalist Papers, the design of the United States is designed for that. And I've seen it in conflict as well. We really need leaders who are mature enough to see a middle road.
You talk about the comparisons. You make an analogy to Plutarch's Lives, and you draw comparisons between people like Boss Tweed and Margaret Thatcher. Just give us sort of a thumbnail sketch of what we can expect in your book with regard to that comparison.
Sure. In our new book, Leaders, Myth, and Reality, what we've done is taken 13 leaders, and when we look at that comparison, like Boss Tweed and Margaret Thatcher, what we're really doing is exploring why they would emerge as leaders. And what we find is they're not two-dimensional caricatures. They're really very rich, holistic, flawed people. And that's what we've got to look at in our leaders now, not only in the leaders we see and we follow, but in the leaders we select for the future.
Well, General Mattis is leading the Department of Defense, as you well know, and he spoke out today. And I just wanted to play this for you, given your own commitment and the time that you spent leading our forces in Afghanistan. And I wanted to get your reaction to this assessment of his just a short time ago.
It's not a matter of militaries holding ground. The Afghan lads are doing the fighting. Just look at the casualties. Over 1,000 dead in August and September, 1,000 dead and wounded in August and September, and they stayed in the field fighting.
What would you say about that, sir?
Well, I think Jim Mattis has got it right, and I won't speak for him, but Afghanistan from afar looks very frustrating, and up close it is as well, but it's not the same place it was before 9/11. We've had females in school for now 17 more years, and young people. There's a generation coming up in Afghanistan that won't tolerate the foolishness that my generation is actually running in the country. So I think that there's great hope for the future, but there's frustration between now and then.
General Stanley McChrystal, great to have you with us tonight, sir, and congratulations on the book. It looks great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Martha.
You bet. So still ahead tonight, President Trump revives his attacks on the media.
When I say enemy of the people, I'm talking about the fake news, and it is fake.
But Brian Kilmeade says he is not the first president to take issue in this way with the press, and he's here with a history lesson coming up next. President Trump renewing his attack on fake news in an interview here last night with Laura Ingraham. Watch.
When I say the enemy of the people, I'm talking about the fake news, and you know it better than anybody. When I say enemy of the people, I'm talking about the fake news, and it is fake.
So many critics denounce that as unpresidential, but perhaps there are other presidents who have had similar feelings. President Andrew Jackson, our 7th president, also hated fake news and talked about it quite a bit. Here to explain is the expert on this, Brian Kilmeade, co-host of Fox and Friends and author of the New York Times bestseller, Andrew Jackson and the Miracle of New Orleans. The paperback is now out, so you can stick it in your bag and carry it with you everywhere and read it. Hello, Brian.
Martha, we talked about this before.
Yeah.
I did not know that Donald Trump would even run for president when I was researching this. Then he ran and he won, and I couldn't believe the similarities. Either could the president. He hangs up his portrait in the White House. But one of the obsessions of Andrew Jackson was bad press. And when I see Donald Trump again, I think go over the top like Jackson did and just say fake news to everything. It just gets people like Jonathan Swan of Axios or people here at Fox News exercise. Well, who are you mad at? Are you mad at a network that puts on a panel of 5 people, all who hate you as much, as hate you a lot? Or are you mad at people that are reporting news that might not be positive? Or are you just mad that these people are not on your side? So what Jackson did, which I thought was appropriate, then Jackson would just clip the newspaper articles. And when he saw them, he'd say, hey, what's the deal with you? And we even have a picture. He used to bind them, put them in a binder. He was obsessed with it. And he'd keep these binders right by his chair. And those are the binders date back that he used to keep up until the day he died.
Oh, I saw those when I was at the Hermitage. They were sitting on the floor.
I'm not allowed to open them because they turn to dust. But they are newspapers. And as soon as Bill Jones or whoever wrote a bad story, he'd open to page 56. He goes, you're not getting an interview until you could justify this story. Or he would write it back flip it over and mail it back to him and said, fix this, you got it wrong. He hired his own White House news service. And he said, call it the White House News. He liked a reporter. He hired that reporter. He says, now I want to tell the stories the way I want it. I mean, Donald Trump might try to do that. But that's why he's not the first. I was reading Bush 41. He was upset every day about the way the press was treating him. It's not unusual. It's just that I think the president makes things worse by being so aggressive in the retort.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. I think most presidents have complained about the news. The Clintons complained about the press, said they were all over them all the time. So certainly that's not new. But I think, the term enemy of the people obviously, gets people riled up. But the president doesn't ever hesitate to use it. He thinks it works for him.
Washington didn't think Jackson was worthy. They hated him. He used to go back home and go with his people. Trump in D.C., they hate him in D.C., but when he goes to his people, they both go to big crowds and explain the story. That's why they both were successful. And keep in mind, for Trump haters, Jackson was just as powerful after he left the White House than when he was in the White House, because everyone would come to him for advice and try to get some power. So if you don't like Donald Trump, he's not going anywhere, even if he leaves the White House.
History is always really the most important decider of presidential success. So we'll see. Brian,
Right.
Thank you very much.
Martha,
Great
thanks
book.
for having me.
It's in
Appreciate
paperback. You can stick it in your purse. Thank you. So that's our story, if you had one, for tonight on this Tuesday night. We'll see you back here again tomorrow night at 7. Tucker Carlson's coming up next in D.C. See you then.